Welcome to the Blue Suit Files.
Ugh.
So I want you to imagine a machine, right?
Right.
A massive, incredibly complex machine. And if there's a single, like a microscopic flaw in a fuel line, it automatically triggers this immediate, legally binding dismantling of the entire engine.
Yeah, a complete teardown based on one data point.
Exactly. Well, today we are looking at the Department of the Air Force. And frankly, the engine is you.
Right.
You're here listening to this deep dive because you require a very precise structural understanding of the systems governing human capital within this military apparatus.
Because it is an apparatus. I mean, we are specifically examining Chapter 22 of Air Force Handbook 1.
Which is titled Fitness and Readiness.
Right, Fitness and Readiness. And our mission today is highly targeted for you. We are scanning the Airman Development and Testing Chart.
The ABTC?
Yes, the ADTC. We need to establish your exact baseline for comprehension as a technical sergeant.
So to be clear, you are not here to memorize trivia about push-ups.
No, absolutely not.
You are here to decode the administrative machinery that keeps this organization operational. And, more importantly, to understand how it legally processes failure.
Well, the operational parameters for your rank are incredibly rigid. According to the ADTC, a technical sergeant is mandated to achieve a Level B comprehension standard for all sections within Chapter 22.
And that Level B distinction is critical, right? Let's break that down.
It is. So Level A is defined by the text as remembering. That's just the mere rote retrieval of facts, definitions, lists.
The system assumes you already possess that baseline data.
Exactly. Furthermore, your standard is not Level C either.
Which is what, the application phase?
Right. Level C is applying. That's the execution of procedures through practical leadership scenarios. Level B is strictly defined as understanding.
Okay, so what does understanding actually mean in this clinical context?
The text specifies this means constructing meaning, inferring relationships, summarizing, and explaining the architectural logic of the regulations.
Your imperative is to understand the analytic why.
Yes. You must comprehend the structural relationships between the biological, nutritional, and psychological regulations enforced by the Department of the Air Force.
And really how a mathematical deviation in one of those sectors initiates this cascade of severe administrative consequences in another.
That's the core of Level B.
So we must view the Air Force through the appropriate analytical lens to achieve this standard.
Right.
We are observing a massive administrative machine that quantifies human assets. Throughout this deep dive, we are going to clinically examine how your physical fitness, your dietary intake, your substance consumption, and your mental resilience are stripped of their individuality.
They really are. They are heavily regulated.
Yeah, they're tracked as sterile data points on digital dashboards. They're structurally enforced.
And most importantly, we will dissect the specific administrative consequences that trigger when you fail to meet these systemic standards.
Because the physical body of an airman is not their own private domain.
No, it's not. It is a piece of regulated military hardware.
And when the hardware malfunctions, the system initiates a protocol to either repair it or discard it.
That is the exact clinical reality. So we begin with the infrastructure that monitors this hardware.
Right, which encompasses sections 22A and 22B of the handbook, the bureaucracy of biology.
Exactly. To understand how the parts relate to the overall structure, you must map the labyrinth of accountability.
Because the physical readiness of a unit is not a personal endeavor at all.
Not even slightly. It is a highly monitored logistical requirement overseen by an extensive network.
So let's trace that network. At the top, you have the installation commander.
Right. The installation commander oversees the entire physical fitness program for the base.
Okay. And beneath them?
Beneath them, the Force Support Squadron, or the FSS, they manage the operational budget and the functional execution of the fitness assessment cell.
The FAC?
Yes, the FAC. And the FAC is the independent auditing body.
They're the ones holding the stopwatches and making sure the standards are applied uniformly?
Exactly. Then, within the unit itself, you have the Unit Fitness Program Manager, the UFPM.
Okay, what is their specific structural role?
The UFPM acts as the administrative liaison between the unit commander and the FAC. They track the data.
So they are the bureaucratic bridge.
Yes. And finally, on the ground, you have physical training leaders, or PTLs.
Right, the PTLs. They physically administer the tests, record the data, and lead unit training.
Correct.
I want to stop right there for a second and examine the role of the unit commander. Because the source material uses language that honestly, it demands translation.
It does. There's a lot of vagueness you have to decode for level B.
Yeah, so the text explicitly states commanders must provide an environment that supports and motivates a healthy lifestyle.
Right.
Now, in the civilian corporate sector, providing a supportive environment usually translates to, I don't know, hanging up a motivational poster in the break room.
Or offering a discounted gym membership.
Right, exactly. It's corporate fluff.
Yeah.
So does the military interpret that vague phrase as a suggestion? Or is it strict, punishable legal liability?
Oh, it is absolute administrative liability. You must decode this vagueness.
Okay, so what does provide an environment actually mean structurally?
It means they are directly accountable for the statistical failure of their unit. They are not merely observing test results from afar.
Right.
If a unit experiences a systemic drop in physical readiness scores, the system dictates the commander has structurally failed to provide the mandated environment.
Wow. So meaning they fail to allocate sufficient duty time for physical training.
Exactly. Or they failed to enforce the unit program through their UFPM, or they failed to take appropriate administrative action in cases of individual non-compliance.
So the system will view a cluster of physical fitness assessment failures, not just as like individual indiscretions.
No, it views them as a critical failure of the commander's administrative oversight.
The system demands accountability at every tier. But the methodology of that accountability frequently evolves, which is fascinating.
Right, the metrics change.
Yeah, and this brings us to a massive structural shift in how the Air Force measures the dimensions of the human machine, the Body Composition Program.
The BCP.
Right. Effective April 2023, following Department of Defense Instruction 1308.03, the Air Force entirely decoupled body composition from the physical fitness assessment.
They eliminated the traditional abdominal circumference measurement from the physical test itself.
Right. The old tape test during the PT test is gone. Instead, they implemented an independent annual body composition assessment.
And they are utilizing a very specific metric for this now.
The waist-to-height ratio, or WHTR.
Yes.
So as a TSGT, you have to ask, why did the system change its methodology? We need the analytic why behind this specific structural revision.
Well, the why is rooted in advanced biological risk assessment and asset retention.
Okay.
Unpack that. For years, the abdominal circumference measurement punished broader body types and rewarded linear builds.
Regardless of the actual visceral fat present in the asset.
Yeah, exactly. Visceral fat is the biological mechanism that directly correlates to cardiovascular failure under stress.
So the Air Force realized their previous metric was administratively separating capable assets while retaining biological liabilities.
Right, they were losing good hardware because of a flawed measuring tool. So by decoupling the measurement from the kinetic physical fitness assessment, the system isolates body composition to evaluate purely for health risk.
And it's entirely independent of aerobic or muscular performance.
Entirely. You could score a perfect 100 on your physical test, but still fail the body composition assessment.
That is a critical level B relationship to understand. The metric is precise and unyielding.
It is. A waist-to-height ratio greater than 0.55 triggers an immediate high-risk classification.
So let us examine the actual mechanics of that ratio. You divide your waist circumference by your height.
Simply math.
Right. And if the resulting number exceeds 0.55, you are flagged. Not as overweight, but as a systemic liability.
Yes, a liability. And the text states that not meeting the standard results in systemic intervention.
And that intervention is a highly structured, bureaucratic escalation, isn't it?
It is. It begins with the body composition manager inputting your failing score into the My Body Comp platform.
Okay.
This digital trigger automatically enrolls you in a 12-month informal self-directed body composition improvement program.
The BCIP.
The BCIP, yes. And this utilizes Department of the Air Force Form 108.
The Fitness Education and Intervention Processing Form.
Right. You must trace the progression of this administrative friction.
So what happens during this informal 12-month phase?
Well, the system classifies you as non-compliant with the standard. At this specific stage, the commander will not take punitive administrative actions like a letter of reprimand.
Okay, so it's not a direct punishment yet.
No. However, you are mandated to develop a personalized body composition improvement action plan.
And you're mandated to schedule a medical evaluation, right?
Exactly. To rule out underlying endocrine or metabolic disorders, you are put on official notice.
The machine is actively watching your dimensions.
Yes. Now, if you complete the 12-month informal program and still fail to meet the standard...
Like if your ratio remains stubbornly above 0.55 at your next annual assessment?
Right. Then the escalation automatically proceeds. You are transferred from the informal program into the formal self-directed program.
And this is the exact juncture where the clinical consequences materialize.
This is where it gets real.
Right, because enrollment in the formal program constitutes your first official failure to meet the standard. You are now formally damaging your career trajectory.
Yes, it goes on your record as a failure. You will be reassessed within another 12 months.
And if you fail repeatedly.
Well, assuming the medical evaluation confirms no underlying condition precludes you from meeting the standard, the system authorizes the commander to execute administrative actions.
Which means this escalation pathway ends in administrative separation from the Air Force.
It does. The logic is brutal but consistent.
Yeah, your inability to align your physical dimensions with the prescribed mathematical ratio removes you from the inventory.
That is the ultimate consequence of dimensional failure.
Okay, so we now move from the dimensions of the body to the operational output of the body.
Right, the physical fitness assessment mathematics.
The composite score operates on a strict 0 to 100 scale.
Yes. The allocation is a maximum of 60 points for the aerobic component, typically the 1.5-mile run.
Yep.
A maximum of 20 points is allocated for the muscular component, usually push-ups, and the final 20 points are allocated for the core endurance component, usually sit-ups.
So the structural relationship between the individual component minimums and the overall composite requirement is, frankly, it's a trap for the uninformed.
It absolutely is a trap.
Right, because scoring the bare minimum on every single component is like a car passing individual parts checks. You know, the brakes work just enough, the transmission holds just enough.
Right, but it fails the overall emissions test.
Exactly. The engine still legally fails. The text explicitly warns that meeting the minimum score in each individual component does not constitute the minimum points required to pass the assessment.
That's a crucial point for a TSGT to understand and explain.
So if an airman scores the absolute minimums required to avoid an immediate component failure, they will not mathematically reach the 75-point composite threshold necessary to survive the assessment.
They won't reach it. They will fail the test and fall out of the satisfactory category.
Okay, so the assessment is an absolute kinetic requirement. However, the system does account for structural damage to the asset through highly regulated medical exemptions.
It does. The Military Treatment Facility, or MTF provider, plays a vital specific role here.
They are the authorized mechanics evaluating the damaged hardware.
Exactly. They determine whether a temporary or permanent medical condition precludes an airman from obtaining a passing score.
And this evaluation is not a suggestion to the commander, is it?
No, it is a medical directive and is documented on Air Force Form 469.
The duty limiting condition report.
Right.
Let us expand on that mechanic metaphor. The AF Form 469 is the mechanic writing a legally binding waiver for a busted transmission.
That's exactly what it is. And the text is unambiguous regarding how these exemptions apply to the physical fitness assessment.
Meaning medical profiles dictate exactly what components are exempted and absolutely nothing more.
Right. A composite exemption clears the entire test.
Acknowledging catastrophic, temporary, or permanent damage to the asset.
Yes. But a component exemption means the member is strictly tested on the remaining non-exempt functions.
So the system isolates the damage.
It isolates it perfectly. If you have a documented shoulder injury, the MTF provider will exempt you from the muscular component, the push-ups.
But you cannot use that shoulder injury as leverage to avoid the 1.5-mile run.
No, or the waist measurement. The system mathematically recalculates your composite score based solely on the components you are medically cleared to perform.
So the remaining components are graded on a modified 100-point scale.
Correct. The machine demands whatever kinetic output the undamaged parts of your body can still produce.
Man, that concludes the output phase of the assessment. The physical test measures the kinetic energy the human machine can produce under observation.
But a machine's output is entirely dependent on its inputs.
Right. An engine inevitably seizes without precisely calibrated fuel.
Which brings us to the DoD regulations governing your fuel lines.
Yes, transitioning to part 2 of our analysis, logistical inputs and systemic toxins, covering sections 22C and 22D.
We must examine nutrition not as a dietary suggestion or a lifestyle choice, but as strict fuel allocation.
So the handbook outlines systemic requirements for caloric intake designed to maintain the energy balance of the asset.
It does. The clinical estimates range from 1,600 to 2,400 calories per day for adult women.
And 2,000, 3,000 calories per day for adult men.
Right, but it further dictates the exact physiological breakdown of macronutrients required for optimal operation.
Okay, break down the macros.
Carbohydrates must comprise 45 to 65% of total daily caloric intake,
Protein is rigidly set at 10 to 35%.
and fats are allocated at 20 to 35%.
So why these specific percentages? We need to explain the physiology. Why does the military demand up to 65% of your intake be carbohydrates?
Because carbohydrates are the primary substrate for glycogen synthesis.
And glycogen is the stored form of glucose in your muscles and liver.
Exactly. During the high-intensity kinetic output required by the 1.5-mile run, your body relies almost exclusively on glycogen stores for rapid ATP production.
Okay, so if an airman ignores this regulatory allocation and adopts a fad diet,
Like a ketogenic diet, for example.
right, reducing carbohydrates to, say, 5%,
They systematically deplete their glycogen stores.
so when they attempt the aerobic component of the assessment,
Their cellular energy production completely fails. They physically collapse or fail the runtime.
so that 45 to 65% requirement is not dietary advice.
No, it is the optimal operating parameter for a military asset to maintain the energy reserves necessary to pass the mandatory physical assessment.
And the protein rebuilds the muscle fibers torn during the kinetic output.
Right. And fat regulates the endocrine system and provides dense caloric energy for sustained low-intensity operations.
The system calibrates the fuel to guarantee the output.
It has to.
Now, the system regulates the fuel, but it also strictly polices unauthorized additives.
Yes, it does.
We must decode another instance of highly dangerous, vague language within this section, specifically regarding dietary supplements.
This is a huge issue for asset retention.
Yeah. The text issues a warning regarding bodybuilding, performance enhancement, and weight loss products.
Yeah.
It states that proprietary blends do not specify the amount of each ingredient.
Right.
We must translate this into stark reality for a technical sergeant.
The literal translation is liability. The text says proprietary blends do not specify the amount, meaning that by consuming these commercial products, you are assuming absolute regulatory and biological risk.
For undeclared, untested substances.
Exactly. The commercial supplement industry is largely unregulated by the FDA prior to market release.
So manufacturers hide behind the phrase proprietary blend to mask the inclusion of cheap, potent, and frankly, frequently banned chemical analogs.
Right.
Let us provide a visceral example of how this destroys a career.
Okay.
Say a technical sergeant buys a pre-workout powder from a strip mall off base. The label promises extreme energy and lists a proprietary energy matrix.
Which means nothing legally.
Right. That matrix secretly contains an unlisted DMAA analog, which is a potent central nervous system stimulant.
Okay, so the sergeant takes a scoop, goes to work, and is selected for a random urinalysis.
Exactly. The DMAA analog metabolizes and triggers a false positive for amphetamines.
And here is the clinical consequence. The commander does not care about the receipt from the supplement store.
Nope. The commander does not care about the marketing label.
The chemical was introduced into government hardware by the asset.
The technical sergeant assumed the risk the moment they swallowed an undeclared substance.
And the result is an Article 15, loss of rank, and potentially administrative discharge.
A decade-long career is terminated in 48 hours over a pre-workout powder.
It happens all the time. Now, the system does regulate and permit specific stimulants, primarily caffeine.
Right, due to its recognized ability to improve cognitive performance and vigilance during sustained operations.
Yes. However, the system caps this additive at clinical efficiency.
What is the cap?
The text strictly defines the biological hazard. Consuming roughly 400 to 500 milligrams of caffeine at one time triggers caffeine intoxication.
So to put that metric into perspective, 400 to 500 milligrams is the equivalent of consuming 1.5 highly concentrated commercial energy drinks in a single sitting.
Correct. And when you cross that specific milligram threshold, the asset effectively poisons itself.
Caffeine intoxication leads to severe nausea, motor agitation, dangerous electrolyte imbalances.
Cardiac arrhythmias.
Yeah, potentially life-threatening symptoms.
The asset degrades its own mission readiness through unmanaged excessive intake of an otherwise authorized stimulant.
And this leads directly into our analysis of system deviations. We have discussed authorized fuel and authorized stimulants. What happens when the inputs are fundamentally toxic?
Right, when the hardware is compromised by chemistry.
The Air Force addresses the chemical compromise of its assets through the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention and Treatment Program.
Known as ADAPT.
Yes, ADP.
The ADPT matrix is central to understanding the system's management of compromised hardware.
So for a technical sergeant achieving Level B comprehension, what is the crucial relationship here?
You must infer the strict clinical distinction between non-clinical services and clinical services within the ADPT framework.
Okay, let us translate the manual into reality again. Say you show up to a morning formation reeking of alcohol after a long weekend,
Okay.
but medical evaluation determines you are not a clinically diagnosed alcoholic,
Then you are placed in non-clinical services.
which is essentially a severe administrative correction.
Right. You receive targeted prevention, mandatory education, and your commander is officially notified of your poor judgment.
But if you cross the line into a clinical diagnosis, the machine takes over entirely.
Precisely. Clinical services are deployed exclusively for assets that meet the strict criteria for a diagnosed substance use disorder.
As defined by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders?
Yes, the DSM. This is no longer an educational issue. It is a critical medical intervention.
The asset is assigned a multidisciplinary treatment team.
Right, which may involve medically managed inpatient detoxification to safely process the chemical withdrawal.
So the individual is formally diagnosed, heavily tracked, and treated until the professional medical team determines they are effectively in recovery.
And only then can they be returned to operational status.
And what occurs if the asset fails to adhere to the repair protocol?
The text states that a demonstrated pattern of unacceptable behavior or an inability to comply with the treatment plan results in the treatment team formally declaring a treatment failure.
And the consequence is severe and permanent.
Yes. An individual who fails the ADAPT program will be immediately considered for administrative separation by their commander.
The system attempted to repair the toxic input. The repair failed, so the system discards the asset.
Exactly. And the consequences of toxic inputs extend far beyond the administrative confines of the ADAPT program.
Right, we must examine the line of duty, or LOD, determination.
This is a massive piece of the puzzle. This is the exact intersection where the clinical consequences of individual misconduct collide with the financial liability of the military apparatus.
If you are injured, contract a disease, or die, the military automatically initiates a formal investigation.
Governed by Department of the Air Force Instruction 36-2910.
The system must determine if the event occurred in the line of duty or if it was the result of your own intentional misconduct.
Such as alcohol or substance abuse.
Now, this is where we really must highlight the cold, calculated irony of the military bureaucracy. The LOD determination is fundamentally about the machine meticulously protecting its wallet.
It is entirely about financial liability.
Let us construct a scenario to illustrate this. You go snowboarding on a weekend pass.
Okay.
You consume 3 beers at the lodge, rendering your blood alcohol content slightly elevated. You crash and shatter your femur.
A catastrophic hardware failure.
Right. So the military initiates the LOD investigation. The investigator pulls your medical records and identifies the elevated BAC.
And because of that, the injury is officially ruled as occurring not in the line of duty due to your own misconduct.
And the text specifies the exact financial ruin that follows an adverse LOD determination.
Because you broke the asset through unauthorized toxic inputs, the military instantly severs its financial liability.
You face the forfeiture of your military pay for the duration of your incapacitation.
You completely lose eligibility for disability retirement.
You lose any potential severance pay.
You forfeit future veteran benefits associated with that specific injury.
The Air Force will literally refuse to pay for the titanium rod required to fix your leg.
They will medically discharge you due to the shattered femur, but you will leave with zero compensation for the wreckage you caused.
The system rigidly protects its financial interests against your unauthorized deviations.
That is the core takeaway.
Okay, so we have established how physical readiness and chemical compliance are easily measured through stopwatches, measuring tapes, and urinalysis.
The outputs and inputs are easily quantified.
Right. We must now transition to part 3 of our analysis. Psychological infrastructure and triage, located in Section 22E.
The system must maintain its most fragile, invisible infrastructure.
The psychological stability of the airman.
Because you cannot measure mental resilience with a waist tape, but the system still attempts to quantify and regulate it.
So how does the military categorize the breakdown of mental resilience?
Well, the handbook requires you to quantify stress reactions into 4 distinct observable categories.
First is cognitive stress.
Yes. This manifests biologically as memory problems, poor judgment, and inability to concentrate on complex tasks.
And a loss of objective awareness,
Second is emotional stress.
which takes the form of profound apathy, severe anxiety, depression, and mental fatigue,
Third is behavioral stress. This is identified through external actions.
like drastic appetite changes, complete social withdrawal,
A sudden spike in substance abuse.
or unprovoked violence.
And finally, physical stress. The psychological breakdown manifests physically as frequent illness due to a suppressed immune system.
Chronically high blood pressure and profound physical exhaustion.
The system requires you, as a technical sergeant, to continuously observe and categorize these symptoms in both yourself and your subordinates.
And when these stress reactions escalate from chronic symptoms into an active acute crisis, the system deploys the ACE model.
Right. This stands for Ask, Care, and Escort.
I really must push back on this concept to clarify its true nature for you, the listener. Is the ACE model merely a corporate liability shield?
What do you mean?
Well, is it just a kitschy acronym the Air Force uses to prove to Congress that the organization provided suicide prevention training? Or is it a genuine procedural medical triage tool?
At a level B understanding, you must recognize ACE as a critical, non-negotiable procedural safeguard.
Okay.
It is not a corporate suggestion. It is a strict medical protocol designed to stabilize a rapidly failing asset and initiate immediate transfer to professional control.
Look at the procedural steps defined in the text. Ask requires you to directly interrogate the risk.
Yes, you do not use euphemisms. You must ask the direct question. Are you thinking of killing or hurting yourself?
Then comes care.
Which requires you to actively secure the environment. The text commands you to take reasonable steps to secure potential lethal means.
So you are actively intervening to remove firearms, confiscate medications, and eliminate immediate physical threats.
You are securing the asset.
Finally, escort.
This is a legal and custodial directive. The text strictly forbids leaving the person in distress alone under any circumstances.
You must physically transfer them to the chain of command, to emergency services, or directly to a medical facility.
You do not let them drive themselves. You do not let them go to their dorm room to sleep it off.
It is an unbroken chain of custody.
Exactly. The ACE model is a strict protocol to prevent the irreversible loss of human capital.
And this acute triage protocol feeds into the broader, long-term framework of Comprehensive Airman Fitness, or CAF.
Right. The CAF framework requires holistic maintenance across 4 specific domains.
Mental, physical, social, and spiritual.
The CAF model really demonstrates the deeply interconnected nature of the human asset. The system recognizes that structural integrity requires balance.
So the mental domain requires cognitive adaptability and positive thinking under pressure.
The physical domain requires kinetic endurance and scheduled recovery.
The social domain demands connectedness, teamwork, and integration into the unit structure.
And the spiritual domain requires a sense of purpose and alignment with core values.
And to be clear, this is not necessarily religious, right?
Right. It's not strictly religious. It is a required framework of internal meaning.
Okay, so a failure in one domain guarantees a cascading degradation in the others.
It absolutely does.
For example, a failure in the social domain, such as a severe divorce resulting in sudden social isolation, directly threatens the mental domain through depression.
And that depression degrades the physical domain through sleep deprivation and a lack of training.
Which ultimately impacts overall mission readiness when the airman fails their physical fitness assessment.
The domains are not isolated pillars. They are a continuous feedback loop.
Now we arrive at the culmination of our analysis. We must connect the dots.
Because the ADTC defines level B understanding as determining how the parts relate to one another, how they interrelate, or how the parts relate to an overall structure.
Right. We cannot look at these sections in isolation. To achieve your required comprehension, we must synthesize the material to observe the chain reaction of failure across multiple chapters.
Let us trace a complete multi-year failure pathway across the regulations we have discussed.
Let's do it. We begin with a failure in Section 22C, nutrition.
Okay. An airman fails to comprehend the physiological necessity of complex carbohydrates versus simple carbohydrates.
So they adopt a highly deficient diet, lacking in sustainable energy, failing to build adequate glycogen stores in their muscle tissue.
Right. And this nutritional failure remains dormant until it directly triggers a failure in Section 22B, the official fitness assessment.
The airman attempts the 1.5-mile run. Because their fuel lines are empty, they experience catastrophic glycogen depletion.
Their cellular energy production halts. They fail to meet the minimum aerobic component score, resulting in an unsatisfactory composite score below 75 points.
And that physiological failure immediately triggers an administrative response.
Yes, the physical fitness assessment failure is documented in the My Fitness system by the physical training leader.
This digital entry automatically alerts the Unit Fitness Program Manager, the UFPM.
The UFPM summons the airmen, informs them of the Mandatory Fitness Improvement Program, or FIP requirements,
And formally records the counseling.
Meanwhile, the commander is simultaneously notified of the failure.
The commander now possesses the administrative discretion to initiate punitive actions.
Right. This can range from formal verbal counseling to a letter of counseling to a letter of reprimand or placement on the commander's control roster.
Which immediately halts the airman's ability to promote or PCS.
So a failure in dietary carbohydrate intake has metastasized into a career-halting administrative roadblock.
Let us trace a separate psychological pathway that loops back into the administrative machine.
Okay.
An airman experiences severe operational demands, triggering behavioral stress reactions as defined in Section 22E.
And this stress manifests externally as severe social withdrawal and off-duty alcohol misuse.
This behavioral deviation bridges directly to Section 22D, substance use.
The airman's alcohol-related misconduct, perhaps a public intoxication incident off base, mandates an immediate command referral for a substance use assessment.
The ADPT program manager evaluates the airman within the required 7-day window and diagnoses a substance use disorder.
The airman is enrolled in clinical services.
Here is where the surveillance mechanisms of the system interlock perfectly. The text highlights a critical directive. Department of Defense Instruction 649.08.
This is vital. We must understand the strict boundary between medical confidentiality and command awareness.
While civilian medical treatment is largely confidential under HIPAA, this specific DoD instruction requires mental health providers to disclose safety issues.
Such as suicidal thoughts.
Right. And fitness for duty issues directly to military commanders.
The boundary is highly conditional. When mission readiness is at risk, medical confidentiality ceases to exist in its absolute form.
The commander must know if the asset is compromised.
Yes. If the ADTT treatment team determines the airman is failing to progress in recovery, they utilize the authority of DODI 6490.08 to notify the commander that the individual is no longer fit for duty.
The commander then initiates administrative separation.
The psychological stress reaction evolved into chemical misuse, which triggered medical surveillance, which ultimately resulted in administrative termination.
And this brings us to the key takeaways you must be able to explain as a technical sergeant.
Your Level B imperative is not to recite trivia.
It is not to memorize that a physical training leader requires CPR certification.
No. Your fundamental responsibility is to understand the total architecture of these interlocking systems.
Systemic synthesis is mandatory for your rank.
You must understand how an airman's failing waist-to-height ratio score of 0.56, inputted by a body composition manager into the MyBodyComp platform, automatically initiates a DA Form 108.
You must understand how that specific form legally establishes noncompliance.
Which protects the commander's ability to eventually separate the airman if the formal self-directed program fails 12 months later.
You are not just observing a waist measurement. You are watching the gears of the administrative machine begin to turn.
You must internalize the clinical reality presented in Chapter 22.
Fitness, nutrition, and mental health within the Department of the Air Force are not personal wellness journeys.
The military does not care about your journey.
These elements are measurable, enforceable prerequisites for maintaining a lethally effective, combat-ready force.
That is the ultimate summary. Every drop of sweat expended on the 1.5-mile run, every percentage of macronutrient consumed to rebuild torn muscle fiber.
Every milligram of caffeine ingested and every psychological stressor experience is mapped to a specific regulation.
It is documented on a specific form, and it is inextricably tied to a potential administrative consequence.
The system measures everything because the system relies on the reliability of its components.
Precisely.
I want to leave you with a final, chilling systemic logic to ponder as you review this material for your development. We have spent this time dissecting how the machine monitors you, but consider the philosophical endpoint of this extreme quantification.
It's worth considering.
If the military apparatus possesses the technological and administrative capability to successfully quantify the exact circumference of your waist, dictate the precise mathematical ratio of your dietary macronutrients down to the percentage, and mandate the procedural triage of your deepest psychological trauma into actionable, trackable data points on a digital dashboard, At what point do you cease to be an individual human being and become purely an administrative asset waiting for its next diagnostic scan? Thank you for your attention during this deep dive. Your analysis is complete.